So you think you can stone me and spit in my eye? Time signal to change. Hey all, welcome, and now for something completely different. Today we are moving away from the great literature and art of bygone eras to talk about a song that I really love, and so does everybody else. Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody. This is the first episode of my new series, Pop Culture Masterworks. Yes, I know that the internet is just flooded with Queen stuff right now. Rami Malek just won the Best Actor Oscar for his portrayal of Freddie Mercury in the Bohemian Rhapsody movie, and really Queen have been a hot topic since the publicity campaign for that movie started. YouTube in particular has been absolutely stuffed with a surfeit of reaction videos. Totally my first time ever hearing this crazy song! Next up, reacting to my first time ever seeing a cloud in the sky! Whoa! But I love talking about the song, and I thought that if I approach it as somebody who has a doctorate in literature, in the same way that I approach talking about Shakespeare plays and great novels, maybe I could find a new angle to approach this seminal work from. And you know, as a huge fan of Queen, I just wanted the chance to gush. Alright, well first, since I'm not overly keen on new criticism, I always like to establish context. That's what I do when I talk about writers and painters, so why not rock musicians too? This track was recorded for Queen's fourth album, A Night at the Opera, which was released in November 1975. One thing you should know about Queen in their early days is that they were very prolific. They signed with EMI in the summer of 1973, and here they are just 2.5 years later releasing their fourth album, which they promote in advance by releasing Bohemian Rhapsody, their sixth single. That's a lot of output in less than 3 years. To use a totally scientific method for determining this level of productivity, they were releasing albums at a rate of Tool to the power of 73 Guns N' Roses. Now, despite what you might think about this track just coming out of nowhere and leaving an unsuspecting public just absolutely gobsmacked, which is a nice narrative for a movie, it really wasn't that big of a surprise for rock music fans of the day. Queen were quite a new band, sure, but they were established and popular at this time, with a distinctive sound led by those soaring vocal harmonies and the crunchy guitar, and of course their penchant for flamboyance. Killer Queen had been a top 10 hit in a number of countries the previous year, getting to number 2 in the UK charts. And you know, that song was pretty theatrical and idiosyncratic. Let them eat cake, she said, just like Marie Antoinette. She never said that, by the way. Queen were new kids on the block, but they were a pretty big deal, and EMI was willing to take risks on them. A Night at the Opera was the most expensive album ever recorded back then, and it took them 4 months of studio time. And the huge pomp and circumstance of this track was definitely not a surprise to at least Queen's fans. If anything, it was a return to an older sound of all of 2 years ago, with their first albums Queen and Queen 2 having a lot of prog inclinations, with tracks like My Fairy King and March of the Black Queen. As Brian May later told Guitar World, these 2 tracks in particular meant that the band was already well in tune with Freddie's excursions into strange areas. It's a nice bit of romanticization to just depict the song as coming out of nowhere and blowing everyone's minds. Whoa man, nobody has ever done anything like this in music before. The only things we've had up to this point have been blue suede shoes and the twist. My mind has been thoroughly boggled. Now, people were buying the Doors records and listening to The End for 12 minutes, or Pink Floyd, or King Crimson for years before this. And yes, studios chopped up Light My Fire and Us and Them for single releases. But even when you're just talking about pop singles, 6 minutes was nowhere near unprecedented. You have Like a Rolling Stone by Bob Dylan, Hey Jude by the Beatles, that one's over 7 minutes. And sure, that's Bob Dylan and the Beatles, huge stars. But you know, the Beatles had felt emboldened to release Hey Jude without a single cut, because earlier that year, 1968, Richard Harris had this huge hit with his version of MacArthur Park. And, you know, he wasn't a huge music star, he was kind of known as an actor, but not a musician. You probably know him best as Dumbledore No. 1. MacArthur Park was 7 minutes and 21 seconds long, and managed to be a top 10 international hit. You know, Bohemian Rhapsody not being 3 minutes was unorthodox, sure, and absolutely the record company asked for a shorter single cut. One was actually made and released in France, and it's now a rare collector's item. But you know, this was definitely not the mind-blowing departure from accepted norms that it's often made out to be. And you know, that's part of the myth-making process of collective memory, to just to dip a toe into the subject I based my doctoral thesis on. For me at least, this is one of the facets that actually makes the song more impressive. People didn't stop and take notice of this song just because it was so different from ABBA and Casey and the Sunshine Band. It had this huge impact because it was building on what other rock musicians had established at the time, but doing it so well. This song was part of a greater movement and a very exciting time for rock music. You know, psychedelic rock and progressive coming together with heavy metal and glam to make this perfect piece of hard rock experimentation, just at the time when punk was ready to explode onto the scene, which didn't kill off all the old prog rock dinosaurs, by the way. That's another nice piece of myth-making. Queen were building on what was already established by the Beatles, the Stones, the Who, Pink Floyd, King Crimson, the Doors, Genesis, Yes, Jethro Tull, all of whom were shifting huge numbers of copies at the time, whether or not they remained a functioning unit. Sure, to make a successful biopic, you want to make a kind of underdog story, and yes, because of issues with their management at the time, Queen were still young, poor and hungry at this point. This just wasn't an explosion onto an unsuspecting scene with something bewilderingly new and different. Audacious, sure, just not that big of a shock. You know, the point of all this is that Bohemian Rhapsody didn't just appear in a vacuum and take everyone's breath away because all they had was disco. And it didn't need to do that for it to have been this remarkable achievement.
It wasn't perhaps as much of a jump as people might think, because if you listen to some of the previous stuff, like Freddie had a song called My Fairy King very early on. Is this the second album we're talking about? First album, actually. You know, where he was beginning to do things that were very structured and very, not exactly operatic, but much more sort of classical influence to them. And so we weren't as shocked as you might think when he came in with the Bohemian Rhapsody thing.
Musically, it's structured beautifully to make it fun for the listener. You know, I believe Freddie when he says that he just stuck 3 separate songs together.
It was basically like 3 songs that I wanted to put out, and I just put the 3 together.
But there are little key elements that really unify the disparate parts in a way that's really quite neat. You know, there are lots of great musical analysis channels out there on YouTube, so I won't go into too much detail, but broadly speaking, the song is divided up into 5 parts. There's the intro, which a lot of people call a cappella, but, you know, because the piano and that silly wind noise come in while the voices are still going, I call it more of a cantata, but intro. Then the ballad that starts with the piano leading before the guitar takes over, and goes into the mock operatic section that everybody loves. Then you get this like hard rock headbanging section, super fun, and then finally there's this sort of melancholy and whimsical coda, outro. The opening is kind of strange musically, with all those beautiful vocal harmonies having a lot of sevenths in them, so that the key is pretty ambiguous until you have a caught in a landslide, no escape from reality. That 5-1 perfect cadence that tells you that the key is B flat. The ballad section then uses a lot more conventional chord structures. There's lots of 1, 6, 2, 5 progressions. But these 2 sections also introduce the 2 standout motifs that really help this song to cohere as a whole, as well as really allowing for some interesting transitions to different keys. Both of them are very similar and they're little chromatic hooks. The first just goes up and down around the tonic. It's introduced with easy come, easy go, little high, little low, but it comes back again and again. There's I see a little silhouette of a man, and I'm just a poor boy, nobody loves me. You know, it really helps tie different sections together. And the other motif is similar to this. It's chromatic again, but this time it keeps going down, and you usually find it in the bass. Now I've gone and thrown it all away. It goes B flat, A flat, G. I really do not have perfect pitch, by the way. Those notes are probably very, very off. You get it again when Freddie sings I don't want to die. It goes F, E flat, D. And when that part repeats under the guitar solo, the bass just keeps going down in steps all the way to the A, which is the tonic for the operatic section. It's a line cliche, but it's much more foregrounded than you might expect as a music theorist. These 2 chromatic motifs really allow for the song's transitions to make more sense, and bring a kind of cohesion to help bridge the huge isthmuses between the song's sections. An isthmus is a kind of a land bridge connecting 2 different areas, by the way. And something I really love is that at the very end we get one last little chromatic figure, but with a twist. Any way the wind blows, big gong hit. Those first 3 notes are the same as those motifs, chromatic steps down, but then it jumps up for the perfect cadence and the big sense of resolution. Lovely rock composition, totally led by the ideas of the voice, where the voice wants to go, to give the maximum sense of drama. That said, personally, I'm more interested in the rhythm. As you may have noticed if you've ever seen my end card, as well as being an academic and an author, I am also a drummer. Mostly I play prog, but I've been in all kinds of bands, signed and unsigned, so sometimes I'm doing this, and sometimes this, and sometimes even this. And one reason that Bo Rap means so much to me is that it was the first song I ever performed for an audience on the drums. I mean, I was playing the drums for the audience, it wasn't an audience of people on the drums. You see, when I was a teenager, my class performed it for the older kids when they were graduating. I got to do the "I see a little silhouette of a man" part, and I think that the sight of a group of people who were all crying, suddenly switching to laughing, I think that was a big contribution to why I always wanted to be a musician. And this song does some weird things rhythmically, much more than usual for Queen, who usually stick to, 4/4 or 3/4. At several points there's an extra little beat or two, not breaking the rhythm so that if you're tapping your toes along with it you'll get thrown out, but enough to give a certain sense of emphasis. So you think you can stone me and spit in my eye, ba-da-da-da-da-ba-bow! That little bar of 2/4 is a real fist pump moment, and it's a nice little proggy time signature change in the most straight ahead and rocking section of the song. And it's not the only place. There's also carry on, as if nothing really matters. And of course, Magnifico! These little extra steps come in very different parts of the songs, very different contexts, but I feel in a small, subtle way that helps tie the whole thing together, and they're very noticeable for a drummer. Possibly the weirdest rhythm though is right at the start, the first 4 lines. In transcriptions you see the music starting on a rest, with a little 5/4 bar to take into account for that no escape from reality part. 3, 4, 1, is this the... But for me it doesn't quite fit. And if you listen to the band's original multi-track recording of this on the stems, if you listen to the drum track, you can hear Freddie counting himself in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Is this... But he does it wrong. Well, I mean, he doesn't do it wrong. He wrote this. Whatever he does is by default right, but he does it differently from all those transcriptions. Freddie's count for himself has it as if the vocals start on beat 1. If you do it like that, you have to put in a little bar of 3/8 to make this work. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Even then, it's pretty loose, the first and last lines in particular, feeling a fair bit slower than the others. I'm pretty certain Freddie was just winging it, and that's fine, The purpose of notation is for us to be able to write down and hopefully replicate the most important thing, which is what we hear, the performance. Freddie comes up with absolutely one of the most distinct, unusual and recognisable intros in music history, and I think that quantized versions and MIDI versions, they just never quite capture it. But since my PhD is in literature, I think it's about time we got to the thing that I can probably contribute more than the dozens of other YouTubers you might be able to watch talking about this song. By that I mean looking at Bohemian Rhapsody from a literary perspective. Okay, me from the past, I'm just gonna interrupt you right there. I'm really happy for you, I'm gonna let you finish, but yeah, I'm editing this right now. Check out my snazzy editing clothes. And yeah, it's pretty obvious this is going to be way too long, even for my standards. So I've decided to chop this video into 2 parts. I figured that the context setting and musical analysis can stand on their own as a kind of aperitif, and then yeah, we can put the more sort of meat and potatoes, the literary analysis that supposedly is what I can uniquely offer, and we're going to keep that as a part 2. Because yeah, my computer's starting to get slow and it's going to take me hours and hours more to edit. I think it would be better to just upload something now. So yeah, that's what I'm doing. Ven came to say hi. So yeah, that's all for today. Join me next time for some PhD goodness. Please do all the usual YouTube stuff, and I will see you again next time. Until then, enjoy my tastiest drum fill.